I'm going to say this in the very beginning because there will be financial consequences. Don't be cute. There are many of you in the industry have already decided that I'm going to beat the system and I'm going to be cute. Don't do it. Bright is going to be here, and I'm not sure if it's tomorrow or not. I put out a text, but I haven't gotten a response back. Bright's not playing. There is a $1,000 fine for those of you who think you're that cute and famous and fabulous. All right, so note, any verbalization that has to do with monies is not accepted. And those of you who have not taken any of the Bright classes, you better pay attention when they show up, if it's tomorrow or if it's the next day, whatever day it is, because it is intense and they're not playing. So I've heard everything from agents who figured they would put 3 pillows on a couch, meaning it's a 3%. How fabulous is that? I'm just outrageous mindset. There is a team leader in the burbs who's having QR codes made for their signs. So an agent can go to the QR code on the sign and find out if there's a compensation and if so, how much, which I actually thought was awful clever. Right? So things to keep in your mind. Anything about compensation, we just can't talk about. Okay. All right, let's look at the first form that is really a temporary form. It's the N as in Nancy, P as in Paul, C as in cat. Notice of 2024 policy changes. And the small print under that says, for use with sellers or buyers who have existing brokerage relationship. So in translation and in English means if you're in a contract with either a seller or a buyer, as a buyer agency contract, this form has to be introduced to them. This notice briefly describes the multiple listing policy changes implemented in August of 2024 that may affect contracts you have with your broker. Not for nothing. We as realtors always should be teachers, but now, like, we're not even kidding. You really need to be a teacher. And the only way you can teach something is you have to understand it yourself. So these forms actually have to be read. You know, that's a novel concept, but you have to read them. You yourself have to be able to answer the question across the table from your client. And you know, we whiz back in time 25, 30 years, and that's how we always did our business, across the kitchen table. This is now coming back to that time, which really wasn't a bad time. These forms on the internet are very convenient, but they're also convenient enough that we as agents don't do our due diligence and give the explanation of our fiduciary relationship with that client, buyer and or seller. This form is really important in every single one of your transactions that exists now on paper. They have to read this and sign it, and this has to go in your command. Here's the other thing. Bright's not playing. You don't know a lot of what Bright does, but as the broker, I will be randomly getting an email for Vicki Carey's listing on 123 Main Street. And they just say we're doing a little audit and we want you to send all of her documentation over. I have to send the listing contract, seller's property disclosure statement, all of those goodies. Yes.
So we're going to be getting some questions in the chat. If you want to, pause and direct to me when you're ready for questions. But we do have a couple about when are we supposed to introduce this form? Should we have this signed now, or do we need to wait till the 17th?
I would say have it signed now, and there's a caveat to that as I'm going through this. Now is the time. Everything became effective August 1st. So here's a novel concept. How about being proactive rather than reactive? You do understand the difference, right? Okay. So let's be on our game and let's know that we have work to be done. So proactively, you're going to sit with let's go with the seller right now. And here's the other part to that. In the listing contract that is already executed by your seller, is there anybody here from another brokerage other than KW in Power? Okay. Thank you. Whatever the commission was agreed upon between yourself and that seller really should be carried through because it's a contractual. And what we would be changing, if anything, would be the compensation. So with that said, this introduces the high points of the changes nationally. I want everyone to enter into a new agreement of listing. I want you to enter into an entirely new form. And you say, Vic, but why? This explains, because there are idiosyncrasies of small words that have been altered in the original listing contract to this contract. Let there be no loopholes for anybody to venture into. Every one of your listing contracts needs to be on the new form. Don't challenge me. I'm not somebody to play with. Now, I certainly hope that's clear with everyone. Every contract has to be new. This also gives you an opportunity to sit down and do some explaining to your sellers. So if they agree to X commission, that X commission remains the same on the new contract. Okay, unless. And if it's already signed, you're actually in a contract or it's pending, it will not be altered. If an offer is on the table but has not yet been executed, it's not right to be changing a commission or compensation to a buyer agent at that point, because the buyer agent did whatever homework they needed to do to find out what the compensation was going to be. And now you think you're just going to change that? No. Okay, let's try to play nice in the sandbox. Generally speaking, the public has no clue what's going on. None. It's a very small percentage of people, A, even heard there's something going on in real estate, and B, actually has the knowledge of what's really happening. Okay, so if you have a listing though and no offers are in on the new form, then with conversation with your seller, if they so choose to alter their mindset of their original thought of compensation, that would be an exception where you could do that. Okay? Does that make sense? So this form, as you can see, it's all red. A lot of what I have is the sample ones purposefully. So you can see red means all new verbiage, blue means they relocated the verbiage. So you can see this is entirely red because this form is brand new. Read it, understand it, use it, and have it signed and downloaded in your command. This is going to be a mandated form if you ever think you're getting paid. Now, if you don't care about getting paid, I don't care either. But this has to go in command. Okay, let's start with an exclusive buyer agency contract, which will be our next one. Now, at the top of the buyer agency contract, you can see it's red. So there's a lot of explanation to things that have been added into the contract. Generally speaking, there isn't a whole lot that has changed in the buyer agency contracts, of which is 4 pages. And of 4 pages, it's really page 1 and a little bit on page 2 that has been altered. The important part here is, in an executed buyer agency contract, you agree that you will work with only one buyer, and this is an explanation to the buyer themselves on how business is going to be done. One buyer agent for a certain period of time, and that you could owe a broker's fee to the broker if you purchase a property during the contract time period. Contracting other buyer agencies and using their services during the term of this contract could mean that you, the buyer, might owe fees to more than one broker. People cheat. They cheat in marriage, they cheat in their taxes, and they're going to cheat on you as a buyer agent, because that's how life is. You need to make it very clear and go over those lines with that buyer. Don't get cute, because by getting cute, we're in a marriage right now. You will be caught and very possibly have to pay 2 commissions. The only way to get somebody's attention is to go through their pocket, and that will wake somebody up. If you have negotiated a particular percentage and or flat fee compensation that is owed to you for your services. It's very important you know what your services are. Yesterday, an email went out of 176 points of interest of what a real estate agent does in a transaction. If you didn't see that, go find it from yesterday's email. Not even kidding a little bit. You know, we do things all day long and don't even think like, oh, that's something I just did. Like, let me add that to the list, because it becomes so nonchalant. But when you break everything down that we do, every conversation we have, every form we fill out, how we do our searches, what do we do with lock boxes, how do we set that up, get the signs up, get the signs down. And there are so many variables. This will help you because we are weak. We are very weak realtors. And knowing, really, what is my value? And is that not what you're trying to accomplish here in the buyer agency contract? You need to show your value. This is why X percentage is what I charge. How many here, with a show of hands, have gone to their doctor's office and questioned the copay? What? No. So whatever the copay is that the little lady behind the desk says is what you reach in your pocket, pull out a credit card or your checkbook, right? We just write it. How many here have negotiated a percentage from an attorney fee? Very good. And I knew it would be a small percentage. Same thing is happening here. You are a professional. You need to show your value. Having that email that went out yesterday of 176 items that you do in a transaction is only to help back your dupa up. Here in writing is to give you an example, Mr. Seller, Mr. Buyer, what I do on a daily basis. So please get that out and read it. Okay. Basically, the buyer agency exclusive is pretty much the same. There are some small verbiages that have been altered. Does the buyer have a written agreement such as a buyer agency contract with another broker? That question was asked before, but the verbiage was a little different. It also asks and speaks of, buyer understands that this exclusive was a word added. Buyer agency contract. We never used to have that, so that's now in here. Where the changes really happen is in paragraph 2. So we can look here at paragraph 2. And it starts fairly much the same as it always was. Broker's fee paid by the buyer to the broker is as follows. In a purchase transaction, with the seller represented by a real estate broker, then in parentheses it was added, this broker or another. Why do you think that verbiage was added? This broker or another broker?
To do with dual agency.
Exactly. If you're involved in a dual agency. So they added that verbiage that doesn't remove your value and split it on compensation, right? The fee of blank percent of the purchase price or blank, which would be a flat fee, whichever is greater, and blank. I'm so disheartened to know how many people here are very poor in having buyer agency contracts done. I've always been amazed by that. You walk from a listing with a contract, yet a buyer agency or term sitting with a buyer consultation, they'll walk away without a contract. I don't quite grasp why we as agents never felt we were good enough to enter into a contract. This is where you all have to gain ownership. You have to show your value. All right, so that last and would be if there was a buyer broker's fee, right? That's where that would go. Advance fee retainer. Now, this is something new, but it wasn't new. It actually existed in the old form. Advance fee or retainer X with a dollar sign. A broker's fee is earned and due, non-refundable at time of this contract. That was also in there, but the rest of the sentence was not. This advance fee will be credited against any other fee stated in this paragraph unless otherwise stated. So if you charge, hypothetically, because your gut's doing that funny flip with these new buyers, they saw an infomercial at 2:30 at night and they're quite fabulous because they're sharpshooting you and all kinds of stuff. And you have a feeling they're not going to play by the rules. You could quote, hypothetically, a $350 fee for the first 2 times you take them out. If they agree upon that, then you figure out how you're getting paid $350 for the first 2 times you take them out and when the service would be paid for. If you go further and you actually enter into a contract, that $350 is deducted from the total that buyer agent is owed to you. Does that make sense? That did not exist before. Broker will not retain any amount greater than the broker's fee agreed to in paragraph 2B, regardless of the source. Here's the questions. I have negotiated as a buyer agent. Let's pretend Ed. Can't say numbers. Let's pretend I agreed with them that my fee is Ed. But it just so happens that the house we're putting the offer in, that seller says, I'm no fool. I was born in 9 just like this. And I understand the importance of offering a compensation to the buyer broker, and I am willing to do that. It just so happens that that number that seller is willing to offer as a compensation happens to be greater than the letter A in the buyer agency contract. What does the buyer agent get as compensation?
What do you put in there?
I'm sorry.
I don't know what percentage you put in this document. That is what you get.
Is what you get. Yeah. And I don't want to muddy the waters because we're just doggy paddling as it is in here. But that could be altered in the agreement of sale as additional monies to the buyer agent. But as we speak right now, let's just try to keep it simple enough that what you have agreed to with your buyer is what you're going to be compensated for. So keep that in mind, okay? Yes.
Could you have the buyer sign off on it that like if you show the house and like it's 3%, you sign off on 2.5, you just cross it out, it makes a great house buyer neutral.
I'm told yes. But again, we're in muddy waters. But I'm told yes, that could be done. And it all depends on that buyer. If they determine the value you brought to the table is exceptionary and they're willing to throw an extra 0.5% or 1/4% into the pot because you guys were really good at what you did, well then I'm going to say yes. Be careful, because if your relationship wasn't all that warm and fuzzy, that may not come into fruition, but you will be entitled to what was agreed upon in the contract initially. Okay? You got that? Does that make sense? When you turn to page 2, it's in blue, and it's in blue because it's been moved. If buyer leases a property, instead of buying a property, broker's fee is X. And sometimes this happens. Buyers get so disgusted, especially in the market we've been in, where you're putting 7, 8, 9 offers in, that they throw their hands up and says, I'm just going to lease something. It's already predetermined in here what your fee will be. Okay? Even though the broker's fee or portion of it may be paid by the seller or listing broker, broker will continue to represent the interests of the buyer. It is broker's policy to accept compensations offered by a listing broker, calling cooperating compensation. If the listing broker offers cooperating compensation that is less than the broker's fee agreed to in paragraph 2B, buyer may authorize, there we go, broker to negotiate an increase by using a form such as a cooperating broker compensation form. So you could ask and see if you could get the differential. Buyers can negotiate their sellers' concessions by including them into the agreement of sale. Buyer understands and agrees that if buyer receives less than the broker's fee agreed to in paragraph 2B, though may be combined or cooperating compensation and seller's concession, buyer will be responsible in bold capital letters for the paying of the remainder of the broker's fee due to broker at or before settlement. Get what you agreed to. Maybe you can get more if situations allow it, but that buyer needs to know what was agreed upon is what you are getting paid from them. Yes.
Can you get less than what you agreed upon? So let's say I go in and I'm like, all right, I'm going to ask for 4% because there's a good chance that someone's offering a bonus or something like that. If they're only offering 2.5%, I'm willing to go down to 2.5%. So I'll pay that at 5.
So, if I may,
Yes.
the class that we had at 11, Ben Houston-Jones did a great job. And one of the things that he covered is, in certain circumstances, his personal standard for himself is to do 3%. In certain circumstances, when the co-op compensation is only offering 2.5%, he will go back to the buyers and say, my fee is 3%, but I'm going to give that extra 0.5% back to you. So he doesn't do it up front in the contract, but he reserves the right to go back and do that retroactively.
Okay, the numbers were kind of just throughout the numbers were everything. I'm going to ask for 10%, but I'm okay with taking 3%, depending on what they're offering.
Correct, but your agreement was 2.5 hypothetically.
No, let's say it's 4.
Oh, let's say it's 4.
If they're only offering 2.5%, I'm only going to 2.5%.
I'm going to say I feel you can. Again, I don't have all the answers. A couple things I do want to bring to your attention. That when all these forms went out, I included the guideline for the preparation but I have to apologize. When I was so active trying to get this out, I then realized that the guidelines had not been updated by Carey, and I apologize to that. So the rest of the contracts explanations are correct, but there are some here that are not going to have that. With that said, one of the packets is FAR standard forms update that went out. That does have the correct updated guidelines to the new paragraphs. So you can refer to that. Jake?
I was gonna answer your question, to my understanding from all the inputs I've gathered is, we cannot as agents say, Mr. Buyer, I'm going to charge you 4%, but in the additional terms say, and if I'm getting less from the other side, I'm going to take the less off this. That is not allowed. So that is very simple answer that Brian was saying. You cannot say I will take 1,000 or 800, whatever is less. We cannot say that because you cannot say my services are the cheaper of whatever the word is wrong.
Yeah, it seems there that's more, but not less.
But what you cannot say is, yeah, I'm going to charge you a percentage or a flat number of $1,000 for my services or 8% for my services. But if somebody else is offering more, all of a sudden my value became more. So I cannot accept the more either. But there's a change in terms. You could do that and say, Mr. Buyer, I now agree and have renegotiated to charge less or to charge more. But if you think about it, why would a buyer ever say, if I agree to pay you A, and now somebody's giving you A plus 2, all of a sudden I'm okay getting you A plus 2? They're going to say, why didn't you negotiate the 2? No? What's that?
I mean, I just think the easy way to explain to the buyer, listen, like, if I don't act, I'm never getting it. If I do act on this and they're only offering this, and I'm okay.
I think I think there's a scenario that we should discuss, or that we should want to discuss with this class, is how would that strict be to renegotiate less or more labor?
Yeah.
I think that's a very key portion of, yes, anything you can negotiate, but like, how are you going to negotiate with somebody? If you came to the buyer, or you want to buy it, could you please sign the buyer's agreement for all the services that offer at 4%? And you were saying, in case I get 2.5, I'll reduce this, would you send it on time? To the contract?
If there's the bottom says whatever is less. Yeah.
You said, trust me, come back when it hurts. We talk about it. You can't deliver it. Which buyer going to say, I'm going to send it today, we talk about it. Now, what is your service being offered at the price? So I think that's a spirit that we should all learn.
Usually, you know, the bottom you cannot put it the extent, but only offering to account.
That is absolutely not allowed. What we did about which we provided last time. There is a lack of leadership that we took this step. You can't say, as I said, and there's an example that in the writer said, I'll get $5 or $3 for this. You can't do it.
It makes sense that it's like.
There's a mindset I noticed from the very beginning with agents that we were customarily accepting, generally speaking, whatever the co-op was giving us. Right? No one was really questioning it. We were just like, okay, we'll take that. Now, I notice a bit of greediness in the agents because they're feeling now, I have options. You really never thought you had an option before, but you did if you had the buyer agency contract and if you had filled it out greater than oftentimes what the buyer was compensated for, buyer agent. You did have that option, and that's been in there for years and years and years and years. But nobody really practiced it. You kind of just went along and said, okay, they're paying X. And originally I said I want to fly, and that was signed by the buyer, but I'm not going to break their stones. You know, all of a sudden, well, whatever that number used to be, I was comfortable with. Maybe it was 2, maybe it was 3, maybe it was somewhere in between. I was okay with. Yeah, it's not okay. Yeah, 4. There's a little bit of greediness. Let's keep in mind what we're doing here. Okay, so if you want to do that, then you're going to have to put that in your buyer agency contract. Yes.
You're, you're in the middle of it, you already have a signing contract co-op with the client and it hasn't closed yet. Are you at risk of having the buyer rep that the seller is going to alter their agreement as you advise you should do?
So that's why so important, which is down this pile, is the CBC, Cooperating Broker Compensation Agreement. You must get this addendum signed because talk is cheap. No text, no email, no phone call is going to guarantee a percentage of what has been agreed upon for a compensation from a seller to a buyer. That form is going to be mandated and in command with every time you guys enter into a contract.
I actually just dealt with that in South Jersey. My buyer's going to see a listing and they said 0 buyer's agency. So I called the agent and she was like, no, it's 3%. So I was wondering, like, how do you know that's real? Like, you were saying 3%, but
Yeah, right.
you know what happens? How do I get that for sure?
You need the form.
And do you do it when the offer is sent?
Yes,
Okay.
right. That's when everybody's signing and everything.
That's my question, is if you already have that signed, the current closing, hasn't closed yet, so it's going to be trying to get that to close. Should we get a new document instead?
Why?
We need an updated version.
Oh, are you talking about a pending contract right now you have?
Yes, sorry.
Ah, I misunderstood. I apologize. If you have a pending contract right now, yes, I would resubmit. So we're all on the same page with everything. As well as when I spoke earlier, and I spoke to I spoke to Paralegal this morning about this. And it is greatly encouraged that every contract that is active at this moment that's going to be altered on the 17th be rewritten on the new forms. Not just using this notice of 2024 policy changes. That's not considered acceptable enough. They're highly recommending that all listings be altered into the new form. Due to as small as some of the little words is, are, was, then, where have been altered. And he said, I know I'm splitting a hair here. He said, but it's better for all of us to have the correct form with the correct documentation on it. Yeah,
And that goes for if you have buyers under pending as well.
absolutely. It's highly recommended.
So if you have an existing listing contract with the seller,
Yep,
I have to rewrite it.
you should.
in the form of, if we've since dropped the price in the original listing contract, what am I putting as the price in the new contract?
So when you drop the price, did you have that in writing?
Yes.
Well, that's the right answer. I do wonder why I don't sleep at night.
What the fuck happened?
Okay, so we have an addendum that says we reduced the purchase, the offered price. Okay, the purchase price. So now you will go to that because that's picking up. We're moving on to the contract from where we left off with the change to the new one. So yes, the answer is yes.
So in your flow here, are you moving to a listing contract next? Because I have a bunch of questions as this relates to listing.
I will once we talk about the non-exclusive buyer agency. Yes, I'm trying to do a flow.
I know you said that you're gonna require all new listing contracts for, how about buyer agency contracts? If you have a buyer of a contract, you want the new buyer agency contract,
Absolutely,
okay,
absolutely.
if they're closing anytime in August. Or later.
Or later, yeah, anytime. What this is doing for you guys, it's to stop that phone call, that fresh email from some other agent and the zigzag. You are going in compliance right off the get. Yeah.
So there are a couple questions in the
Yes.
chat that all kind of circulate around the general question of when should we employ, like at what point in the process should we employ the CDC? You know, is this, I'm getting ready to show the property, I called the listing agent, they told me it's 3%, I send it over to them right away before I even show the property, or like when is the best time to deploy this?
Obviously, if it's a full contract you're going into, you can, but it's not a bad idea if you want to send it over ahead of time. But it's binding to what? You have no contract to support it. So it's at this very moment, at this very hour, on this very day that I'm showing 123 Main Street, the compensation that is being offered from the seller is 2.75. It doesn't mean by the time I enter into a contract, that doesn't alter.
So would you want to send it with your offer?
Absolutely, always, must, go. Okay? All right, so there were a couple other little word changes, but nothing significant. Really, page 1 on the exclusive buyer agency contract is the gist of what it is that has been changed, which isn't great. Those of you who chose not to use this from the beginning of time, shame on you. You cannot call and make an appointment for a property without having this signed by your buyer ahead of time. Like they're not kidding. Enough of you playing like goofs. And that's what you are. You're playing like a goof.
Will the listing agent require seeing it? Or they allow the showing?
I don't know. Right now, that is what is stressed upon us, to tell the agents that they must have this prior to any engagement with the buyer. So immediately you have to enter into a contract. And that's where everybody gets squirrely. Oh my God. See, many years ago, I used to say on the exclusive buyer agency, it's a marriage. We're married together.
I was talking to attorney Delaware for ourselves all the time when she was like testing people with your strong, I heard of agents, and I said, yeah, there's a lot, like, make sure they understand this, right? It's like more than all of us. And like the attorney's perspective with the buyer agency contract, no matter what state is, if you do not have an agency relationship established, you are essentially taking a stranger into another person's home. And then who would actually become liable at the end of the day, God forbid, for somebody's worst case scenario, something is stolen, it's broken, someone gets hurt, then it is a court mess. So forcing us to have a domestic relationship, something that you bring up to your clients where you're talking to them, because this is going to be new for the general public and the questions something like that. Also, now you're covered under our liability, our insurance as well, so fine, of course, right?
Excellent.
You're not covered before, so even though this seems like a horrific thing to do now, which should have been covered time, like if you think of it from that standpoint, everyone likes to be covered. Everyone likes to be insured, everyone likes to have peace of mind. So now you are legally able to provide that because you have a cemented, established legal relationship. Further before you
Wait a minute. No, that's excellent. Thank you. That's a very good point. So there's true representation. So the question was, let's see if anybody here has an answer. You never used the buyer agency and you trotted these buyers up and down, in and out of a dozen houses. Who were you representing when you were going through the house?
Seller.
Were you a sub-agent? Anybody here even know what sub-agency is? And by your ages, there may be one back there who knows.
Essentially, you represent the listing agent, but are acting with the buyer, but not in their best interest. You are not representing them.
So, a million years ago, when I started real estate, there was no buyer agency. And there was sub-agency, but nobody quite grasped what it was. So let me give you a scenario. I'm setting floor time, something nobody else knows about. But floor time was when the phone would ring and somebody would say, I just drove by Maple Avenue and I saw your sign on that cute little Cape Cod. Can I see it? We didn't ask a lot of questions back then, not like we do now. And I said, well, come in the office. It's actually our listing and let's see if I can get you an appointment. Meanwhile, they come over and I call and Mrs. Jones says, absolutely, I'll take the dog for a walk, come on over. It's like, okay. So we all jump in the car and we go over, I unlock the door, we walk through. Oh my God. This buyer looks at me and says, this is exactly what I've been looking for. I want it. Let's pretend we even did pre-approvals back then. So let's pretend. So we go, all right, real fast, let's get you pre-approved. Okay, let's write the offer. How much you want to offer? Do you want that refrigerator? Do you want that washer and dryer? What about the patio set? What do you want? We would add it in and we'd submit it to the agent sitting next to me because it was his listing. Here you go. And we close it in. I pick up the phone, I go, hey, Jamie, you got it. Oh my God, I'm so excited. What are we doing? Maybe we do home inspections back then. Maybe we don't, but let's pretend we do. So let me help you get that home inspector. Here's a list of a couple of them. Let's go do that. You go there, you happen to know a little bit about a house and you talk to the inspector about the way that service cable line looked and the way there are double taps over here. And, and that buyer, first time home buyer says to herself, Jesus, Vicki's in my corner. My God, she knows things I don't. Oh, she's great. We get all the way to the table. The seller, a mature woman with her daughter. And she's lived there 55 years. Her husband passed away. And there's a little tear. It was a bit of an emotional moment. We all hugged. We all said congratulations. Everybody got their checks and they went along. The entire time, Vicki represented the buyer. But the illusion was that I was, because, I was there with that home inspector talking about that service cable line and that double tap. And do you think there's lead coming in here? Go scratch that pipe. Do you think that's lead on the intake there? But no. Some agency, you're not representing the buyer, you're representing really the sell side. I should never have been that emotionally involved, but we can't help ourselves because we want the best for our buyers, because we want them to refer to us. So some agency does exist and it's here. So the question is, all that time when you were running with these buyers, you never really represented them. They need to know that they're winging it. And there's no more winging anymore. I am legally not allowed to wing it anymore. I have to enter into a contract. You and I have to be married. And that used to not settle well with some people. This next form, which is the non-exclusive buyer agency contract, has been around forever, but this form, though, is a little different, and more has been changed on this form. But this form allows the buyer and the agent to date. We don't have to be married. We're just going to date, and we're going to date on certain property addresses that you put in here. And those property addresses, when you show it, we're dating. And then maybe that's it. I only wanted to say 3 properties with it to see if I like her. It was sort of like, let's get a coffee at Starbucks. And now, do I want to take her out to dinner? Is the next time we're out. At some point, your job is to convince that buyer, see how fabulous I am? See, I was fabulous on those first 3. See how much I brought to the table? How much did you learn from me? Making you, and we stood across the street before we walked in the house and we talked about what we saw visually. We talked about the blacktop in the driveway. We talked about the shutter. We talked about the shingles looking a little rough. They're starting to tear. They're starting to lift. All that observation was because I was in a contract with you to give you what I know, to show my value. Listen, you guys need to be more than a door opener. You pay a kid $60 to open a door. It's not what you are as a professional. You as a professional have to go in there and show your value. So this form is a fabulous form. Let's use it. Because there are buyers who don't trust us, don't like us, don't know, don't want to be married. That's fine. You don't have to be married. We can just date. It's okay. Yeah.
So there are two questions in the chat that I want to bring up. The first one, I think very much pertains to this form. And is asking how are people doing buyer agency contracts with investors since they don't really work with multiple agents? And I would assume that this is
Exactly right. Because there are those who date a lot of people. Right? And this allows you to cover your dupa for your time for these 3 or 4 particular properties that you took out. That's guaranteeing your services. And investors especially, this is wonderful. And as agents, shame on us because we didn't really use it, but it's really a good form. It's very much mirrored to the exclusive, but with exceptions. So you look at it, pull it up, and read it to get a feel, especially if you guys are using or working with investors. Make sense?
The other question was, do we need to attach a copy of our buyer's agency with an offer when we send it over?
No. Okay. What questions do we have about buyer agency? Are you getting it?
Yeah.
Like, if the listing agent asks for a copy of your buyer agency agreement, you have to send it to them.
That's your contract. Yes.
You said there was a place to list addresses here.
Yeah, it's 1C.
Yeah.
See there's like 4 lines. 2 lines with a space between it. So
Okay.
yeah, like line 21, 23, 22, 23, 24. That's where you would put the addresses.
So this is contract, say an investor decides they want to have an contract. Do we then have to kind of decide exclusive, but this, you know,
I would sign an exclusive. Absolutely, because things change. And what if this transaction ends up going in the toilet for some bizarre reason? Now you got them locked in. Right? Things happen. Yes.
So as you're taking people out to show the properties, show them these 3, and then they want to see 3 more, you have to do a whole new contract, put an addendum together. How logistically, would you do that?
What I might do is page 1 over again and have them initial and date the bottom. So you can see an updated date of page 1, because that's really where the crux of all this is. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yes.
So the difference between exclusive and non-exclusive is whether or not they're seeing units on a property.
No.
It's not exclusive, it's kind of, it was the difference.
Exclusive means you're married.
Exclusive is that.
Right. So they can't cheat on you.
Okay, not.
And if they do, they need to know, and it states it. You may, Mr. Buyer, have to pay 2 fees because you cheated on me. Let me tell you the truth. The bulk of the world out there is going to sign the exclusive. It's when you get that kickback, you get that resistance that I don't know if I want to work with you forever. Don't take that as a complaint. Take that as a challenge. No problem. I understand. Let's sign this non-exclusive form for the 3 properties we're going to see today. And I will show you my value. Your opinion will change.
So you're listing the specific properties that you're showing them on the non-exclusive.
Correct. Correct. Yep.
I think they're doing now is we're just like kind of dates. In case you meet one person at one property, and they're like, wait, this is unfortunately more of the rules, you choose, right? So you say, it's August 17th, we are dating just one day, not doing properties.
You could make an alteration anywhere as long as everybody agrees to it. Have an initial and date.
I think that'll streamline the process and say, 2 days, here we go.
You could, absolutely. You can make an alteration, but always make sure, guys, you have your initials dated. Big mistake in the industry, nobody dates. Well, when the hell was this initial? Like, think about what you're doing, okay? Yep,
Couple more questions from the chat. The simpler one, I think I'll start with. Historically, we have consumer notice and seller's property disclosures at open houses. Should we start having non-exclusive contracts with us as well? Same question about Zillow lead showings.
the first one, yes, have a non-exclusive there, absolutely, why not? The Zillow leads, not real good with that one. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Doesn't matter what the lead source is, if you're showing that you're going to have the buyer, you need a management agreement. Exclusive all.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
The other question that was in there is, if the situation where the buyer cheats happens, what's the brokerage's role in terms of pursuing that commission?
So I'm going to guess the cheating happened, and did it happen with the property they showed? It would only count if it's a property they showed.
Yeah, I think the crux of her question is, obviously as an agent, you want to pursue your, any commission you're owed. What is the role of the brokerage in, going after that with the agent?
Well, then we'd have to go to grievance, an arbitration, dispute resolution, procuring cause. There are all these variables that can play into it. But when that then happens, you notify the broker and say, I got a problem. And then we talk about it. And then I go back to the other broker and the agent. We zigzag back and forth. If we can't come to a meeting of minds, that's why there are these other avenues to pursue. It's not clean and dry, guys. Believe me when I tell you, it's not clean and dry. Are we good? Yes.
Sorry, I just want to jump back to the Zillow. So Zillow, for real-time touring and Zillow Flex, they just came out with they're calling it a touring agreement in order to be NAR compliant.
They do it with everybody.
Yeah,
So who's signing that form?
It's up to buyer to sign it. Zillow's not enforcing it, so you have to enforce what Zillow says. At the end of the day, it's our job to enforce it. But they got a copy, and we have to say, hey, did you really just sign it? If not, sign it with a piece of silence.
And what is the crux of what Zillow is sending?
So I haven't done them in the I just
That's okay. That's okay. I appreciate that.
And I got one. I think I may have sent it to you a while ago. I sent it to you. Yeah, it's not that different. I think it's for states. So you say that's
Okay.
They've got a duration of 1 week
On the Zillow?
on Zillow.
Okay.
And there is a fee on there or a spaceport fee that the tenant put in. Those if it's gonna take the cost.
Yeah.
It's also brokerage. Is there a brokerage document that?
I do. I don't know if GR send anything out that they're gonna be accepting that as a grievance.
Yeah, I'm gonna do this. I don't hear this.
So I was gonna talk, I don't know if the GR is gonna accept, if they haven't officially accepted it, stating, because Zillow is a brokerage.
Yeah.
So they're releasing a form as a brokerage that we are recommending this for leads that we are generating, so how are they doing it? I don't know if DSKW and offer reviewed it yet to accept it, or you as a broker of record to.
Right.
Certain how GR and already.
Yeah, forward. I'll have to look into that. I'm gonna be
Some
honest.
things are moving so fast that you're all living together. If in case you saw this one, I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
So you can write an answer for that.
And I'm telling you, this is a moving wheel constantly.
Have you seen all of Zillow?
No, I have not.
I haven't.
Yeah.
Someone brought up open houses, and they should have those forms of the open houses. I don't think you're saying, well, make sure everybody comes in the door. Either sign one of those. Open house, people can just come in. And it's.
Well, our sign-in sheets were there for multiple reasons. One is so you have a name and hopefully a phone number and a contact, but it also is a security reason. There's another reason why we had them.
But you're not required to have everyone come to the door and sign it, not exclusive.
Only to represent them.
Exactly. Right. All right, any other questions? We kind of like got the gist here. No kidding anymore. We gotta have a buyer agency. Listen, guys, take this to bed with you. You laugh. Take this to bed with you. Put it on your nightstand. If you read one paragraph a night, is more than you know at this very moment. The other thing is, it's the best sleeping pill known to man. You will, all of a sudden, you'll wake up because you're dropping the paper on the floor. But it's just a repetition of reading the verbiage over and over. And you get that aha moment when you read it the third or fourth time, you're like, oh, now I get what they're talking about. But please, in this section, which was also sent out, the PAR standard forms, all these forms have altered. There's only 6 really important ones. They're actually even saying 6 important ones. But the explanation for everything is in here on the changes. So it's in basic English language to refer. Yes.
So Jim asks a lender question. When the contract is sent over to the lender, what form will tell them whether the buyer is paying the agent's commission?
What form will tell them if the buyer is paying the buyer agency contract? Right? Because we've established with the buyer agency contract, if the buyer is going to compensate their agent in the transaction.
So I guess then the lender should operate under the assumption that the buyer is paying it. And then if there is a situation where there is fault compensation, CDC should be involved.
Exactly.
That should be sent over to the lender. And
Exactly.
then the lender
Absolutely
knows
correct.
to make an adjustment.
Right. Right. Yes.
So let's say in practice, I have a listing at 6%. Buyer tenancies at 2.5%. They've communicated to the lender, they're paying at 2.5%. And I'm left with 6%. How does that work?
I guess in reality, the answer would be yeah. But why would a seller, if they've been explained to, enter into a contract at 6% if they were not going to compensate the buyer agent?
So we're saying up to, we're gonna give this guy 3%, but now they have compensation from the buyer, right?
Well, that all has to be established during the negotiation. So as a buyer agent, you can write in the contract that you're looking for compensation. Is your seller willing to do that? That all is the negotiating part. Buyer agent doesn't know that your listing contract is 6%. They have no idea. But if they're coming back to you because their buyer is paying Zippo, they can't afford anything.
Right.
You will then have to write that in your contract as the buyer agent, that compensation to the buyer broker will be that of 3% from the seller.
Right, so I've established, we're gonna give these guys 3%, I'm gonna take 3%, now they come back with something that's 2.5%. If I keep the other half.
No, it's suggested, don't do that, is what is suggested. What is suggested is look like a hero and offer it back to your seller.
That's just.
Well, keep in mind, it then becomes a negotiating factor. So if it's negotiated, then the seller says, why are you now getting 3.5? A minute ago, you were only getting 3. Look like a hero.
Oh, no, just saying on what forms I want to dot my i's, cross my t's.
Well, it's in the agreement of sale. It's gonna have to be written in. Right?
I mean, you are still allowed to advertise the commission on your website.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a good chance the buyer will know what the commission is,
Yeah, there is.
so they can follow.
And listen, guys. How many have been in this business longer than 15 years? So what I'm about to say is all with the greatest respect. Remember when we had to show one of Alan Don's listings? With the greatest respect. Okay? We're spoiled rotten. In the old days, you had to hustle, you had to walk, you had to pick up keys. Oh, please, you people would die. You had to go pick up keys, you had to return keys, you had to sign in for keys, you had to sign out for keys. But you had to go to the listing office to get the keys and then schlep wherever you were going and then schlep back. So listen, pick up your damn phone. Pick up your damn phone.
Yeah.
Enough of this, I'm so fabulous, just let it go to voicemail. You're not that fabulous. Okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
As to not short yourself on the buyer's agency commission. As an idea, it would be best to always put 50% if you can negotiate that 30%. Because what you put over there, you should get no matter what the listing agent is offering, right?
Yeah.
So if you it's put over there 2.5 and then you miss out on 0.5% and they offer 3. On the broker side, if we just did 3 and
Yeah, but the buyer has to agree to free before the.
you know what I'm saying? So if you negotiated that was your, how you measure it, hey,
Yeah.
3%. And you 3% each time, just not to miss out on anything. Can you come back then if they offer 2.5 and you're like, you know what? That's okay. Then you can, like you said, be the hero and take off the 0.5%. If you were willing to accept it as a not miss out on those, those other percentages, that could be a big chunk.
Yeah, depending on your price point, absolutely. So everything is always renegotiable.
That was my question earlier.
If you're then the violence.
Exactly.
But one of the additional violence, you would say,
Okay.
I'm going to do it today.
But yeah, but what your point is perfect. You don't slow the 3%.
Or you can identify.
You can tell them, like, I'm going to do it then, months later. Yeah, come on. Maybe you want to write a self-service delivery with it or you can't.
Oh, that's the other way around. 2.5 of advantage.
I mean, I would assume all the buyers would be really violent. What you think they're fighting? Yeah. I mean, because you never know what people live like that.
I think it's on the individual at one point, and how you want to run your business, I assume, you know?
Some people do that. Now, yeah.
All right, guys, let's move on to listing contracts. All right, listing contracts. Not a whole lot changed except for page 2. Page 2 is a heavy page. As you can see, it's greatly changed in the middle of page 2. Talking about cooperating compensation ordered by brokers working with buyers. And it breaks it down. Seller authorizes and instructs the broker to offer cooperating compensation broker is the procuring cause. And that is a big deal. That was added, the verbiage of procuring cause of a successful transaction. Broker will document the agreed upon amount by using the form such as a cooperating broker compensation form. That form is a must. The rules of the multiple listing system do not permit broker advertising cooperating compensation through the MLS or in any other system or platform that utilizes data supplied by the MLS. So
You have an IDX fee.
was that,
Yeah, so what Mon is alluding to, and this is something that I've been paying special attention to. Someone mentioned earlier being able to display the co-op compensation on your website. You have to be very, very careful if your website also has an IDX feed. You're in kind of a weird gray area, even if it's not in the same data that the IDX is pulling, it's still in the same place. So you're in a weird gray area. The kind of best practice would be to, if you're going to do something like that, have that information displayed in a place that is not connected to the MLS in any way, shape, or form.
You're saying any way, shape. Could it be a separate place on your website that's not in your listings or like their things? I know they said you can't put anything, but
Everyone that I've asked that question of directly has been very
just
cagey. Like essentially everyone is saying it's still a gray area, but err on the side of caution. And I think that's kind of what I would lean towards as well is these rules are all like and I am no lawyer, but all the precedent for these new laws is going to be set over the next year or so, and whatever lawsuits get brought, whatever actions get taken, I would err on the side of protecting myself as much as possible versus I think what I'm doing is acceptable through a loophole right now, and then legal precedent 6 months from now ends up making me have to redo everything.
I mean, let me ask this question. If the property is compensated by the seller to the buyer broker, or if it's not, are you showing it? That's my question here. Does it really matter if it's 1%, if it's 4%, if it's 2.25%? Because what does your buyer agency contract say? That's your gospel, is your buyer agency form. Does it get?
I think you need to know that so that you can explain to your buyer. The buyer is given that assigned with you at 3%. The seller is only offering 1.5% of compensation. So your net cost is going to be purchase price plus 1.5%. So you need to know that number.
Right, changes the price of the home.
For the cost of buying, right?
So
I'm still showing you, but I need to know the number.
right.
If my buyer's going to ask me, should I buy this one or that one? How much money are you going to bring to the table?
So then let me ask this question, because this is a situation I'm having in another state. How important do you think the net proceed sheet is on both the listing and the buy side? Super? Fascinating. Yes.
so. And you're never saying about, and we should need to know, I'd like to know, but my, I guess the way I look at this is, if they are comfortable with the worst case scenario.
They, the buyer?
Yes, if the buyer is comfortable, worst case scenario, they agree to work with you, knowing what you're gonna charge, if you take that into consideration for every property that you enter. If something comes up to where you're looking at houses to be top of their limit and your 3% is killing them, then regardless of, like, if you're at that point where you're willing to discount yourself, what does it matter with the listed agent? The listed agent is gonna give you 3%, but you told your buyer 2.5%. Like, are you willing to, like, where's that deal or go to hell over 0.5%? Like, and also, I have a business owner, the reason why I'm self-employed is I work in a 9-to-5 somewhere is because I get to tell you what my worth is and how much I charge for my services. I don't want to rely on some of the agent that I don't know that's answer the deal call when I call 500 trying to figure out why I'm showing kind of set up or how I'm going to see pictures or not it. I'm in the house and there's some wild on the counter and they still don't give a shit. So like, I'm not gonna let that person tell me how much you get paid. So if your buyer is comfortable with your working at this quote unquote worst case scenario, then it's at some point during the deal, you're able to save them a couple dollars, but then that's like a win-win for your buyer and yourself. And I feel like we are allowing other people to dictate how much we're worth, how much we're gonna make, the type of relationship we have with our buyer, and it shouldn't have like almost.
Yeah, interesting, yeah. Okay. All right, so on the listing form, just to let people know, on line 71, if an agreement of sale is signed, but settlement does not occur. Now, this verbiage has always been on our contract. And deposit monies are released to the seller. Seller will pay the broker blank of or from the deposit money. Does anybody know what number goes in blank? Think about your listing form. You're filling it out. You're on page 2, paragraph 5. And if a transaction goes in the Twitter.
50%.
Mazel tov, who was that?
Britt McLaughlin, of course.
Yeah, guys, 50% goes in there. And a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people leave it blank. 50%. So if the brokerage was found favored upon in litigation and the monies end up coming to us because we did our due diligence, that 50% gets split between the listing agent involved and the brokerage. Just to let people know how to fill this out, because so many times I find it's not filled out. I just brought that up. Okay. It talks about on paragraph 7, seller's concession. Seller's concession could be used to pay for any costs accruing by the buyer and acceptable to the mortgage lender. Well, that's the old seller's assist, which we don't use that terminology anymore, but that's really what it is, seller's assist, yes.
There are a ton of questions, so I'm gonna try to keep up with them all.
Yeah.
So Britt asked, you said that if the CDC is sent without an offer, does it type anything, which it gets? But if the listing agent is saying yes, co-op with 2.5% is being offered, then presumably that's what's in their listing contract in section 6. So how will the listing agent then change that when an offer comes in if 2.5% is what's reflected in their listing contract?
To clarify, Vicki, earlier when you were talking about the CBC, maybe it was me, someone had asked about sending the CBC prior to showing the property. So if you pick up the phone and call the agent and they say, yeah, 2.5%, and you send that CBC, you said it's not tied to anything because there's no offer. So when the offer is submitted, that doesn't mean your CBC or that 2.5% is going to be honored. But if they're saying it's being offered, presumably it's in the contract here in section 6 saying that the seller is offering a 2.5% commission. Why would that change, or how could that change?
Well, how it could change is renegotiation between the seller and the seller's agent. Can it happen? I don't know that answer. I'm not going to fib. I don't know. This is something we could run by paralegal and try to get their spin on it.
Yeah, I mean, not often, but occasionally I've had to ask to see a contract before because someone got a little squirrely. And usually when you see the contract, it's clear as day what the agreement was. That's why I was just trying to understand, hey, if you said it's 2.5% and we send a CBC and you agree to it, and then I submit the offer and then you're like, it's not 2.5% anymore. It's like, how did you change that without, and are they renegotiating the listing contract when my offer comes in? Because that seems suspect as well.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I don't know the answer though, but it's a great point. Yeah.
Actually, I was going to remind, was going to ask it. I think it's a similar question that's being brought up. Say it's like, how do we write in the original listing contract if the seller wants to alter compensation based on the offer price? Let's say, they want to list it at 300,000 and they're willing to provide compensation to the buyer agent 2.5%. A buyer agent submits a 275 offer, and now they only want to offer 2%. So how would we write that prior?
So does that become a dual variable then?
I guess it would.
Yeah, right? So that's a good question for Bright, because I don't know that. Does that now become a dual variable in Bright? And I don't have that answer. Does anybody know if Bright's coming here tomorrow? I've been asking the question and I get no answer. Yeah. Did I get an answer? No. I'm sorry,
Zoom at 10.
Zoom at 10? There you go. So that's a great question for you guys to be on break and ask that, because I honestly don't know the answer to that.
And compensation is very based on.
Yes. Does it become a dual variable? I don't, that's a good question. It really is. I don't have that answer. Okay, let's see here. Seller authorizes broker to advertise or otherwise inform potential buyers and their brokers about seller's willingness to negotiate seller's concession, including maximum amount up to, and this is in the listing contract, where you're going to put this, as a percentage or as a flat fee of the purchase price. So you're going to already have these conclusions in your contract. Okay, so check that out. In the agreement of sale, I've been carrying these things around for weeks. In the agreement of sale, very little has changed, except on page 2, essentially. And it would be paragraph 3, seller's concession, buyer broker fee. An addition of any cooperating compensation negotiated between the broker using the cooperating broker compensation agreement, known as the CBC, or via some other agreement. Seller will, and the word sample is stamped across here, so seller will pay the
Following fee.
Thank you.
For buyer on behalf of buyer and settlement.
Thank you. I couldn't read the word. So then the buyer at settlement, you would fill in the blank. Closing cost assist. What's closing cost assist? Seller's assist. So we just changed the verbiage, right? Seller will pay the following amount towards buyer's closing costs other than a broker fee payable to the broker for the buyer, as permitted by a mortgage lender. None of that has changed. The guidelines, there has been some change. Let me correct that. The guidelines in Fannie and Freddie, the VA, FHA, there's the man over there. There are alterations, so you need to be in touch and close communication with your loan officer to find out if we're extending beyond what is acceptable to the mortgage lender.
I've seen congressable leaders, even as tax support, seller assistance to cover their tuition, the broker and the buyer. Now, also on our side, it's possible for them to credit, which would appear in section J, be applied towards coverage for the constable. So I know right now that it's so new, they're going to get an alternative strategy where they're going to allow us to help in that situation. And I'm being asked off of this solution, but the recent contract I received, literally, let's say I get 2.5% seller concession, and then the buyer rate that covers the commission.
Interesting. As always, your loan officer is your friend on the buy side. But as a listing agent, you have all the right in the world to reach out to that loan officer and ask questions. And you're doing your due diligence for your seller. Right? Okay. Yes.
There's one important thing that I think was asked in the chat, that can we include the CBC in the agreement of sale under paragraph 32? And Jen chimed in with the same thing. I was thinking that I believe the PAR shared that the CBC cannot be an addendum to the AO.
That's correct. That is correct. But do send it over, regardless.
Yeah.
The CBC is pretty basic. Cooperating compensation is paid from the listing broker to the cooperating broker working with the buyer. Cooperating compensation should be negotiated prior to the buyer submitting terms or written offers to purchase the property. How about that? We have to do the dirty business first. Or could be renegotiated after an offer is executed, but cannot be negotiated as a term of the offer. So it can't go on the last page. Be made part of. Yep.
This is a me question, not a chat question. So one of the things that they changed is not to be used as an addendum to agreement of sale or when the same broker represents the buyer and seller. Can you talk a little bit more on that? What that means for disclosed dual agency and when, what the situation should be there?
Well, it gets really sticky then, doesn't it? But disclosed dual agency is so important. So if you're going to be a dual agent, not only do you indicate that and review that on the consumer notice, it's the first time the consumer sees that. In the standard agreement of sale, that's on page 1 that we're going to talk about that. And, excuse me, again, in our house forms, how many people know here that we have house forms? Okay, so about a third of you. You need to go on the dashboard. On the dashboard, we have a place where it says KW Empower House Forms or just House Forms. We have a reiteration of the already 2 or 3 times we talked about dual agency is another form reiterating that I am a dual agent and how that is explained again as another level of I explained this, you say to the judge 4 times. And here's all the different forms I explain this. In that, though, it becomes a little bit of a Pandora's box because do we negotiate or non-negotiate a commission? You're walking the line. That's why there are those who don't practice dual agency because they don't feel they can walk that line. But if you feel you can, you have to do your very best to be fair to all parties. And explain the option on both sides, how this could work in offering the X percentage or allowing the buyer agent to pay Y percentage. You have to break it down mathematically, yes.
Can you answer Jamie's question? I was interested by the answer. Why does this formula change to say the same broker profile?
And if I can add on to further explain my question, is this referring to dual designated agency, or is this like you, Vicki, Carey, technically represent all of our clients? If I'm doing a deal across from Davis, can I not use this form? Is that excluding?
I don't have the answer. So we're going to have to find out because I don't have the answer. I'm feeling more, and I could be wrong, but I'm feeling more the form applies to Vicki Carey represented the seller and got a phone call and the buyer went through and loves it and wants me to write a deal.
That's a broker record.
Not as the broker of record, as me as a humble agent is what I meant to say. But as the broker of record, I represent all of the properties. In some of them. Broker?
Broker of record for a brokerage company. The brokerage company represents all the transactions.
I'm sorry. Yes, excuse me. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we're going to have to find out about that one a little bit more. Listen, guys, feel free to call Paralegal. Great people. They can also help to answer some of these questions. There's also a whole breakdown of a guideline with this one, and it's about 5 pages. So if you read through it, that answer may be in there. That was one of the few I did not underline and read through. So something to think about. That's why the guidelines are really important because it breaks it down in easy English for everybody. Because we're drinking by the fire hose right now. One other thing I did want to mention though, excuse me, the seller's property disclosure statement was changed big time. And a lot of people didn't realize that. It is really important that you review this and understand the rules that have been very loosey-goosey for a long time. The seller's property disclosure statement has always indicated it is to be filled out in its entirety. And seldom is that done. You as a buyer agent allowing a buyer to sign a form that is not filled in its entirety, you are doing your buyer no justice here. Where is your fiduciary? You are allowing them to sign for something they don't have answers to. You need to read this and go over it thoroughly and determine if there are questions not answered or avoided. Was it accidentally missed? Was it accidentally missed on purpose? I mean, think about what you're sitting next to the judge, and I've been there. I've actually sat next to the judge. And the question is, why did you allow your client to sign this if it was only half filled out? How do you answer that? Yeah.
Well, sometimes in this market, the listing agent isn't willing to have their seller amend it because they have eight of their offers on the table and a deadline of 60 on that night. So you give your client the ultimatum and say, are you going to sign this from not get the opportunity to get your offer in?
Or do you make a contingency on the agreement of sale?
This does happen, see.
Then you better get in writing in an email that you have advised the buyer not to accept the seller's property disclosure, but buyer has decided to move forward with an incomplete seller's disclosure. Yeah. Because that's going to cover your due.
I have a question regarding the search disclosure in general. Some of the flips, or if they do, it's either completely empty, or does that matter? Does it, they have to be lived in there? Is that if they?
No. You do not have to live in the property. If you are on the deed, you are responsible for filling this out.
Even if it's unknown, like if you put unknown, if you don't.
Unknown is a sneaky way of getting around it, but yes. About 7 years ago, I put an offer in, asked for the seller's disclosure, and it came completely blank, but a signature on the bottom.
Yeah.
Called the agent. I said, gee, thanks a lot for sending that over, but it's blank. He goes, oh yeah, it was an investment property. Never even stepped in the place. I said, none of that matters. And talking to the listing agent, I knew this individual had not one backbone, not one rib cage, not one nothing. I said to him, would it help if I sent you the Pennsylvania seller's property disclosure law? And he said, you have the law? I said, yes, I do. And I sent that over. If you read the law, it clearly indicates that none of that is an excuse. 3 hours later, I got the form back, filled out in its entirety and signed. None of that is an excuse. You have to weigh out with your buyers. The market is squirrely right now. If they're going to let this go half-ass, then you better cover yourself that you have advised them that this should be filled in its entirety, but you have chosen and made a business decision not to worry about that. You need to indicate that you guided them to have it done.
It's an estate sale.
Well, there are 10 exemptions on page 1.
That's one.
If that's one of them, then it only is signed by the executor, executrix, or the trustee. With that said, there is a caveat. If any of those individuals do know of something and could answer the question, they are obligated to do that.
Do you know if it's the same for Jersey?
Jersey, that went effective August 1st. It is mandatory now in Jersey. I actually went to that class. An individual who used to work here is working in it as an MCA in Jersey. And I got notified and I went to that class and it was really good that everybody has to have a seller's property disclosure statement as we do here in Pennsylvania. An agent who used to work for us last week sent me a quick little ditty and it came through on a text and I had not seen it. And I clicked on it. He said, do you know about this? And it stated, and it's just a little tiny blurb, that Pennsylvania, and I had known this from the very beginning from somewhere, but indicated that Pennsylvania is one of the top states for the way their paperwork is structured. One of the top states in dotting our I's and crossing our T's. And being a broker in multiple states, I can tell you that is the honest to God truth. The honest to God truth. Because we are a title state and not the attorney state, we are so much more detailed. And I used to say that years ago, that Pennsylvania agents, even the worst of us, God forgive me, even the worst of us are a little bit more on our game than states that rely on the attorney as to follow up and take care of everything. Yeah.
Honestly, Vicki, it's because of you.
No.
It's one of the areas there. That's it. It's your knowledge, making it the way it's going.
Well, thank you, but it's really important that we have a handle on what's going on. And I have a handle on a lot that goes on because a lot passes my desk. I become very educated. Just to share a little ditty, the beginning of this year, the head attorney from, some people know this, the head attorney from Paralegal called me back because I had a question, and he said, you know, Beck, I just want to tell you something fun. And I said, what? He goes, you know, we did an audit for last year and the year before. Do you know you called us more than anybody in the state of Pennsylvania? And I was like, well, and he goes, that's not a bad thing, but I just found it so humorous. I had to share with you. And I said to this attorney, you know, I check, I recheck. I want to make sure it's right. I don't want it wrong. I don't want to give incorrect information. I'm as cautious as I possibly can. So thank you. But I do try hard to make sure we're doing it right all the time. Listen, guys, we are a huge brokerage. Gee, do you know where we rank as far as KW in the United States, size-wise, or?
Just a number of pages of all.
Well, either one.
Is like another company.
Yeah.
It's the largest residential real estate agent company in the world.
Well, as KW Empower, how do
Power,
you know?
probably about 10.
Okay.
I think in terms of agent count, we're in the top 5. I believe we're number 3, don't quote me.
Okay. So we're up there, right? All right. Don't you think the rest of the world has got a magnifying glass on us? They just can't wait till we make a mistake. They just can't wait to blurt out to the world, look what they did. We have got to be better. The Manny, Mo, and Jack brokerage out there. We have got to be the top of our game. Yes.